Oh, Assad, and what this means for the region.
Yeah, well, what do you sense? I mean, that would be probably some good news in that it it puts pressure on Putin because he is all he's all spent out from Ukraine, so he couldn't help him because he's been helping him for years and years, but he couldn't participate.
And he's housing him now.
He is, yeah, but
So
he
he
couldn't.
won't be extradited for war crimes.
Right.
Yeah. But not, the problem is, of course, with dictators, they're always followed by a vacuum. And so now there'll be all these different quasi-militia groups, juggling for space. And I feel for people. I don't think I mean, by all means, celebrate the end of a dictatorship. And it's great seeing people released from jail after decades. But at the end of the day, there will be a vacuum. And I don't have much confidence the Western powers ever to have a really good read on these countries. You know what I mean? It's just this bullying, chest beating approach. You know.
Well, they're not countries though that are very good at democracy anyway. So, but that's part of the thing. I mean, how do you read? What Western country can read anything into anything in the Middle East? This happened with Obama when he thought he was helping by, contributing to Gaddafi's downfall, but Libya, became a cesspool
Yeah, it
of
was
insanity.
shocking. It was shocking because Libya, if nothing else, was a relatively stable state and it had healthcare, education, functional stuff going on. And I think at a high level, the advice hasn't been that good. It was a huge mistake, but only a series of mistakes because we've got to, in the West, take responsibility for the role our governments have done, whether that's the Balfour Agreement or if you look, particularly after 9/11, right? 19 hijackers, 15 were Saudis. What was Bush's response? And if it wasn't Bush, it would have been any other president, would have done the same thing on the same advice of the Pentagon. 15 Saudis have done this, so let's bomb Afghanistan and cuddle up to the Saudis. Right. So I think everyone should take time out and read a bit of Edward Said's work about the other, which is demonizing these groups of being out of control. That's how they've always been. No, it's not how they've always been at all. And the cradle of civilization and the Babylonian rules of law are still in force today, by and large. So history is important, as always.
It is, yes, it is, and I mean, right now, the entire world is in turmoil. Around, like what's happening. People point to the U.S., but a lot of democracies are in a pretty major struggle.
Well, we are in a crisis because, again, let's trace this movement to the right everywhere back. Every country, whether it's the Netherlands or the USA, Australia, we're going down the same route, all of that. Immigration is the quick and dirty go-to vote winner. Now, America's behavior, and we went in, coalition of the willing, hello, we went in, destabilized Iraq. Now, with Iraq, 4 million Iraqis were displaced during that and are still displaced. 5 million Syrians have been displaced. The entire Libyan thing we were just talking about means Libyans are trying to get to the UK and Italy because of geography. So, this push, wars that we have been part of, have created the displacement that has led to the push on immigration that now pushes everyone to the right. So Nixon's war on drugs is what led to the huge ascent of the cartels in Central America and Mexico because you make more money selling illegal drugs than you do selling legal drugs. So again, we in these few powerful nations have behaved very erratically and badly. And we're now paying the price, but we don't even see the connection anymore.
And there's a lot.
Don't
There's a lot
even
of.
see the connection. And it's a direct line. It's not an obscure intellectual route. It's A equals B leads to C.
Yeah, well, they're short term. I mean, in every pretty much in every country, the politicians they look for the short term solutions. As you say, immigration sells. You know, it's something you can say, look, it's their fault. We have to throw them
It's
out.
lazy politics and it gives
Yeah,
them a short reward. And then we all have to suffer.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. But what's the solution? I mean, in the meantime, where is this going? Right now, it's I don't know how you feel about this. I know that there were a lot of emotions a month ago. Where are
Mm.
you with all of that, with what happened in this election? Because I'm not seeing any kind of change. You know, there are people that still expect some magical, something to happen to prove that there was cheating,
Well,
that
I
there
think
was.
it's part of a bigger picture. Even if we accept that the election was close, now, obviously, some people are still holding a candle for Kamala to come through. But at this stage, my fear would be she'd be sabotaged from every quarter, right? I think it has to be played out. Now, they will do their best to blame Democrats for everything, but he has to, as Obamacare had Obama's name, Trump tariffs have to have his name attached with every breath. And people have to be walked through the nightmare. Gas is going to go through the roof, right? 25% tariff on Canada, which is where the US gets most of its oil, which I didn't even realize till recently. Saudi's only 7%, 60% is from Canada.
Yeah, you know, it's true.
How is gas not going to go up?
Okay, I think
So
I think
that,
that might be the point. The point is that if you assume, as is probably going to happen, that he takes office in January, then the simplest perception explanation is that he's now in charge. And the one thing that you've seen in the last 20 years, especially here, I'm not sure about other countries as much, but in the US, it's been a growing pattern, the division. I remember Obama in 2004 became famous giving a speech, that's 20 years ago, where he said,
mm,
there are no blue states or red states, there are the United States of America. And it's because there was this growing, the two
mm,
sides were at odds. And other than his win in 2008, which was pretty substantial, every other election has been razor thin, very close. And what
mm.
happens is, because of the division and because of where people are and their perception and their partisanship, whoever's in charge takes the hit, because people become unhappy and many times for reasons that are not controllable. You can't control the overall pattern. For example, the inflation was everywhere. It wasn't just here, it was worldwide. But in the US, even though it was one of the best countries in terms of the response, no one could forget the inflation. And so Biden and Kamala Harris take the hit. Now he's in charge, and on top, and this is the thing that people forget, they constantly assign to Trump magical powers of
Yeah,
the man is not competent. Okay, if you put him there,
no,
the way he
no,
thinks,
he's
the way
the
he
opposite of competent.
exactly.
He's a
So and
vandal.
and look at the people that he's trying to. I mean, these are not smart people. Now they can be nefarious. They can be all kinds of things, but the odds are against them in terms of even if he didn't do tariffs, by the way, even if he
Mm,
just
mm,
left things alone. But he can't help himself. He has to meddle. He has to get in there and do things. So then, what will happen is, in fact, what do you think is going to happen to his approval rating within the next few months? He'll probably be
Mm.
in the 30s again. And
Yeah.
when he's in the 30s, so then here's the thing. Then now, this is what I say to people and plan to repeat to people because I think it's really important. Unless you say they cheated, Elon Musk sent rays from his satellite system and wherever, Starlink, and he infiltrated the votes. Okay, well, if they did that, maybe it is over because they can just do it again, I assume, right? You would think.
Well,
You would think.
exactly. And I remain highly suspicious.
Okay, so let's say that you are suspicious, but if you to any extent you think there's going to be another election in 2 years, then that's all you have. I mean, what do you have here other than to say, just like 4 years ago, that's all they had, and they fought their way back partly, and then they recovered. Or Biden back in 2020, there were all kinds of elections between 2016 and 2020, and that's what's coming up again. And
Mm.
otherwise people come up with solutions that to me sound like, Clarence Thomas's wife with, we'll put them all on a barge and we'll try them and this and that. And how's this going to work? What
Mm.
is the mechanism for this kind of justice? Because I don't see it. And
Mm.
by the way, have you heard a peep anywhere? Have you heard anything from anyone you believe carries any kind of credibility around some way to prove something in regard to the voting? Because I have not. I have not seen anything like that at all. Not to mention that then some people even say, well, all the Democrats are in on it because, Schumer was one of the first to go to the floor of the Senate and say, no, don't talk like this because there wasn't any cheating. But then all of a sudden Schumer now is he in league with the other side? Is that what you're saying? Because if I start hearing things like that, I just give up. Then I
Mm.
think they just re-elected, by the way. They made him Senate leader again. So
Mm.
like, is he in cahoots with the cheaters? How does this work? I'm
Well,
confused.
I think at best, it's a growing phase for the US. Like, this is watershed. These next few years are watershed. People could get a big shock, including MAGA, when things don't go up $1.20 here and $4 there. When they really, really, really go up,
Right.
they could see the light. However, we can't assume that.
No, we can't. We can't
If
assume anything,
not,
but we can't.
assume that they will be blaming everyone else as well.
Well, they will. They
So
will, but
either the
they will, but
country
you'll be seeing
matures.
it. You'll be seeing it in front of your eyes. Like, Why did Trump lose in 2020? The main reason is because people could see. See, now people's attention span is like a goldfish. They don't remember anything. In 2020, people saw what he did with COVID, and it made it a lot easier for people to say, "I don't want that guy. He's crazy." Then
But
they forgot.
also, but COVID was a two-edged sword for him. I think it saved his ass, in my opinion, because it was such an unnatural time. Who could predict the world would be stopped for 2 years, right? And so it wasn't normal economy that you would have seen under Trump do this. It was an artificial time, and people were given checks, and survival all sorts of countries. It was actually an accidental experiment in universal basic income, right? Which the right had always said was an impossibility. It was Disneyland, couldn't possibly happen. Well, we did it, UK did it, Canada did it, US. And what happened? It saved the economy, right? Now, because of this 3-year cycle and people's attention span, like you say, being so inadvertently short, um, we have to speak in sound bites now. But there's nothing quite like lived experience. So back to my fork in the road, I got distracted. Back in the fork of the road, people can wake up and MAGAs realize for the first time, their Republican representatives don't care if they live or die. This could be a revelation to them over and above Trump, as the pathetic and cruel and inadequate healthcare starts to fail and fail and fail, and more people are dying at 56 and 62 from preventable illnesses, it could lead to a pendulum swing the other way.
Well, I mean,
It could.
I think that's probably that's the most likely scenario, and that's the whole logic of the divided country and just the back and forth that has been happening. It's in that sense not
However,
that, yeah.
however, I don't have any faith in them being able to put one thing next to the other thing, you know.
Faith in who?
So
Faith in the people.
America could either go back, reinvent itself in some major way. People start to get a bit pissed off with idea of billionaires running everything, a bit of wariness about this worship of money and materialism and individualism, which has marked out the USA, even before the Marlboro Man. And America has always wrestled with this other entity. It could be a breakthrough moment and a new era, or it can just become a laughing stock of the world and become, you know, a backyard for the nutcases that are ruling it. It could just really degenerate, go from a first world, second world, and beyond. It could really actually disintegrate if people don't stand up and fight for it and reinvent it and apply themselves in whatever their special interest is. People, because there's nothing to stop them jailing journalists and things, like
Well, no,
there
there
would
is.
be no bottom line.
There is. That's not a simple thing. That assumes that you can that assumes that you get court decisions that jail journalists, which hasn't been the case. Systems that have been around this long, it's not easy to you can make threats and you can say, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll prosecute. You can prosecute all you like, but you need a crime. You need to go in front of a jury, you need to present evidence.
Well,
You know?
I'd be confident in that principle if we weren't looking at a corrupt High Court, Supreme Court of Ayatollahs. That is where the buck stops, and they cannot be trusted.
Well, they can't be trusted on certain things. I haven't seen yet the Supreme Court, for example. In fact, they didn't even get to the Supreme Court. Remember the Durham case? They were doing a prosecution based on nothing. And of course, the jury laughed at it and said, well, what do we got here? This is like the judges in 2020 when they were trying to, Trump was trying to throw everything in court. And they would say, well, I have no evidence. Give me evidence. So the Durham case
Well,
didn't
this
even
is the
go.
Supreme Court who found in favour of the party that said, I make cakes and I shouldn't have to make cakes for gay weddings. Remember that story? It went all the way to the Supreme Court. She won, and then she admitted it was a fake case.
Well,
This
there are
is the
cases like that.
caliber.
There are,
This is
but
the
not,
caliber of judicial minds you are dealing with. America is full of very smart lawyers, at all sorts of levels, and ambulance chasers and others, but it's got more than its fair share. But it stops here. If the Supreme Court is rotten, the country is in deep trouble.
well, you do know that the Supreme Court has been rotten before. This country has
Oh,
had,
yes.
yeah. So this is the point that at every turn, everyone is ready to say that's it, it's over. We're not recovering from this. It's finished. But it didn't happen in the past. I mean, in fact, the echoes now are very close to the Civil War, where the planets are. The planets are in Civil War territory. That was probably where I totally underestimated because I thought, okay, we're in the Civil War zone. If at least there's a reasonable government in charge, then we can get all the flack from the right, which will be really uncomfortable, but at least it'll seem like it's under control. Now it's even more dangerous, but it is the Civil War. And if you go back to the 1860s and into the 1870s, it wasn't over right away. It took quite a while. during that period.
Exactly. And I think people need to adjust their time expectations
Sure.
around
Yes, exactly,
this.
exactly. But that said, as an example, now we're going through these 4 years. The next big election in 2028, that's the Uranus return. Now, what I notice about astrology cycles is that whenever there is a turn, the likelihood of change increases, right, to something. And what is change? Change is from one to the other. You can't, in the US especially, it's either A or B. Which do you want? It's a
Mm.
two-item menu. So there's an argument to be made that if Democrats had won this one, they would be up to face the change in 2028, which would actually be potentially dangerous, in terms of losing. So, given that they're now in charge, so they have to defend the territory, and it's not easy. It's not easy even when you're honest. Never mind when you're
For
dishonest and
sure.
stupid.
For sure. But we're in unprecedented territory here. What the whole Trump experience has shown us, if nothing else, is how much of the system relied on gentlemen's handshakes. In other
True.
words, behavior around people had the grace to be embarrassed, or if there was enough dirt, it
Yes.
would sink someone. Those days are gone.
True.
Those days are gone. So, have you got the confidence in the legal system to keep them in check? I think you'll see here that will, but in the big picture, I think there's stuff to worry about because of the extraordinary nature of Supreme Court appointments. So, MAGAville are trying to replace Alito and Thomas. The ironies are deep, are they not? They want to get rid of those two guys.
Of course. So you can put
And
younger ones in. Yes.
yeah, they want the younger ones in so they can cross their legs and relax for the next 40 years as we go back to being cave dwellers.
Right.
You know, I think that immunity ruling was more than just a ruling, right? Because Trump is not the brightest guy in the world and he knows he was given a green light, right? So he is beyond pushing the envelope. What is going to happen if he just in his own deluded, demented brain, he decides no midterm elections? What's the country going
Yeah,
to
but
do?
how does he decide that?
He
How does
could
he?
just, I'm just testing this as a hypothetical, right? He has a thought bubble. Well, we're going to do badly in the midterms. I'm just going to cancel it on an executive order. And the Supreme Court, it'd probably take 3 years to come to the decision whether he
Well,
could
no,
or
yeah,
couldn't.
no. Look, I mean, if
Meanwhile, there's no midterms.
okay, so if Trump does that and the Supreme Court agrees, I'll agree with you. Sure. I mean, if something like that can happen and the Supreme
The
Court,
fact it's even a possibility
well, look, with Trump, anything's a
represents a
possibility.
crisis
Yeah,
in the
right. But I mean,
legitimacy of the US
the only reason
democracy.
you're saying that is because he says it. Trump's tombstone is going to say he said, he said, he said. He's always saying things. Okay, that's what the guy is. He says all kinds of things. Let's see, because for you to say we're not going to have any elections, and then that's a
No,
pretty
no,
big thing.
I am not saying that. I'm testing the waters. My bigger point was he can just float things out there
Sure.
and then on the either he gets bored, there's pushback and he gets bored and he moves on to something else. That happens really often, which is what you're talking about.
Hmm.
And then there's things like the tariffs that appear to be going ahead
Yes.
despite the
Yes.
sheer irrationality of that, despite the risk to the domestic economy, despite the risks to the global economy. Who's stopping him with the tariffs? Where are the business people right now, today? They haven't got his ear.
Well, this is where, in terms of my tracking of this, whether or not you win something, you can't escape your astrology. If your astrology is high pressure, then you will deal with it. And he is by no means free of all kinds of problems. This is not a smooth situation for him at all. So
he doesn't look happy either.
No, and he
He
doesn't look
doesn't
well.
look like,
No, and
wow,
he
triumph.
looks burnt out. He looks like
Yeah,
someone that is
yeah,
low energy now. All the insults about low energy. He's incarnated that. And
yep,
I'm sure people will say to him, "Yeah, okay, let's put tariffs, but the prices will go up because as soon as you put a tariff on Mexico, they put a tariff on us. Then we both pay more, and then you can't. What he did last time, he tariffed China, and then he was sending billions of dollars to the farmers. Well, you can't send billions of dollars to everybody. I mean, you could, but
mm,
probably he wouldn't do that. So it's a very difficult thing to do. So we'll see what he does. I mean, they're also talking about cutting Social Security. They're talking about all kinds of things that are
mm,
third rail moves in this country.
yeah.
So I mean, think about it. One of the things they could do would be to say, well, we'll just cut Social Security a little bit to make room for something
Oh,
else.
yeah, they'll fiddle around the edges, right? So people
Right.
aren't so traumatized. They'll raise the age at which you're eligible and they'll fiddle fart
Things like that.
around.
Yeah, right. But again, because of the short attention span and the fact that whoever is running the ship takes the blame, then his next step has to be to get rid of the elections because, well, I'll give you an example. I mean, I looked, I don't have all the data. I only have the chart for Schumer because he's the leader now, even though some people
Ah,
say,
yeah.
but he's the leader. So there's Schumer and there's Jeffries. And to me, they look a lot better in 2026 than they did in 2024. That was one of the
Mm,
things that had me really worried because I kept looking at their
mm,
charts and I was thinking, well, now maybe she'll win and they'll lose. And I couldn't figure out how is this going to work?
yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah,
usually whoever wins, they bring the other two. I mean, it's pretty common. Even though people
yeah.
vote down ticket, they pull the other two. So, but in 2026, and it's not looking so good for him. So then that provides an opening. Now, from your vantage point as well, he'll just try to eliminate that. Okay, but you need a series of steps. There are still a lot of guardrails in this country, even though he's trying to break them down. He's doing everything he can to say, I should be, I should be an emperor, and I should be able to do whatever
Mm.
I want. But he has to do it. He has to accomplish it. He has to get through the legal hurdles. It's like did you hear about Murdoch, your guy, which by the way is,
Yeah,
speaking of Australia, I could blame everything on Australia because this guy is
yeah.
he's the tip of the spear. Murdoch has caused all of this to happen in the
I
US.
was in living in the UK when it was his tabloids who broke the miners, broke the union movement, and put in Thatcher.
Right, but did you hear that the courts said no to him on he
Yeah,
so he
a
has
court in Nevada.
as of now that that could mean, I mean, we don't know yet because I'm sure he'll keep trying, but it could mean that something like Fox News is threatened at some point, right? This is the thing. The
Yeah,
situation is
but
pretty
where will
fluid
it
still.
go? Because his three other kids, like the oldest one, Lachlan, is the baby fascist trying to please the unpleasable father, right?
Right.
Okay. So there's those two, father and son, then there's the other three.
Mhm.
They are all highly educated. They actually understand the complexities of climate change. They actually understand the moral bankruptcy of
Right.
Fox, etc. But will they do anything? If it affects their bottom line, will they do
We don't know.
anything?
We don't know. I mean, it depends. It
Well, I
depends.
think
It
I
depends.
know, and I wouldn't be holding my breath.
Yeah, no, I look, I mean, there's that and there's Elon Musk and there are all kinds of, yes, I mean, no question. And billionaires want to keep their money and it's where we are. It's 100% true. So, but what do we have other than, okay, because one person on my channel sounded all upset because I mentioned all we have is elections. Well, I thought they would read between the lines in the sense that, of course, if you, something you can do if you're an activist, if you can work on the local level, that's true. If it's possible to do more, then do more. But everyone should be focused on the next vote in local
Yes,
elections.
that
In
is the most precious window on the horizon is the midterms. Get the
exactly,
House and the
and this
Senate
is
back.
where when people say, "I think the vote was rigged," And then you start to hear, well, there's no point in voting. This is what happened to Trump and the GOP in 2020 when he started to say the voting is rigged. They didn't vote in Georgia and they lost the Senate. Be really careful with that because every vote is important. And if people think the voting doesn't matter because if I vote, Elon Musk will send his ray of light from the Starlink and alter my vote, then you don't vote. And that's really what causes the loss. Not because they're
Oh,
cheating.
absolutely. It's really important to
It's super,
stay
super important. It's
engaged.
incredibly important to show up and vote. And I mean, you can be discouraged. I'm discouraged. I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy with this at all.
Mm.
But what are you going to do? This is like in sports when your team loses. In soccer, fans will commit suicide over a soccer match. They are so heartbroken.
Or shoot the ref,
Or shoot the ref. Yeah, right. But there's that incredible attachment. Now, here, of course, there's a lot at stake. But, I mean, democracy is voting. That's what it is.
But
It's
here's
key.
another thing I'd like to talk about from a sociology point of view. What you're describing is tribalism, right?
Sure.
And we
Yeah.
all have it in relation to sports and countries and stuff. Here's the thing, the they used to be multi-millionaires, now they jump straight to billionaires or whatever, have been instrumental in every country we could name. And Brexit did this. It feeds this nativist thing. My country is the best. I was born in the best country, is what most people feel, wherever they're born. Like it's an extraordinary social phenomenon,
It's true.
right?
It's true. Yeah.
But the problem with that is, so the billionaires through outlets and paying Joe Rogan or whatever. So you push the whole America First agenda, right? And it always gets a good reception. Yes, yes. They're not sticking to that. They are all globalists. They do not care if you're talking dollars, rubles, or yen. They just shovel it in. So they've got people on the bottom jumping up and down about their country. They don't give a, they do not care.
Right. But
Right.
that's
So you've
their.
got this disconnect
Yeah.
when every supply line, even if it's just one screw, is from somewhere else because they've got them cheaper from somewhere else by exploiting other workers, right?
Mhm.
So no supply chain in the modern world can easily be taken apart. And people don't, they're working in car plants and they're only now working out, auto workers, oh, this might not be good, you know?
Yeah.
So
No,
people,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true. The thing is that is where it's not cheating necessarily because it's legal. It's just really nefarious. That's what Musk did, and that's what the GOP outflanked the Democrats during this past election. The messaging, the way they flooded the zone to tilt, because it was close. Trump in the end got less than 50% of the votes. That's a fact.
yes,
Right. So
yes.
he won by that group of people who typically are the least informed, the most likely to decide who to choose based on something that they hear, and they exploited the immigration issue and probably the too much inclusivity that sometimes Democrats get into. And I've never understood this. They defund the police business and the even when it
Yeah, that
even
is
when it
just
isn't true.
provocative and it doesn't actually help. What's needed is retraining, re-recruiting different people for the police, better training and cultural issues. But yes, the Dems are spectacularly bad at messaging and stay away from the fear messages, whereas the GOP is the complete opposite. Fear, fear, fear. They are taking your jobs. And a viewer just sent to me this little bit, and I think it sums it all up really in a way. And she just said, people earning $700 an hour have convinced people earning $25 an hour that the real problem is those who are earning $7 an hour. So this is how the capitalist class works, by demonizing the other so you're not looking at being screwed by your boss.
Yes, well, and they were successful, and that by the way,
Massively successful.
that by the way is it's in the data that has been released around what happened, who voted for who, and so for example, Latinos and Asians moved to the right, and one of their major concerns was the overly lax attitude to crime that Democrats take, even though crime went down. There's the events in San
Oh, yeah, you
Francisco.
don't want a fact to get in there, Andre. That would be very inconvenient. No facts, fact-free
No, no.
zone.
Well, no, right, right. But the thing is, fact or no fact, whenever there's a prosecutor somewhere that is allowing crime to run rampant until they have to stop it, it's usually a Democratic prosecutor who decides he's not going to enforce the rules, and then predictably the months are passing and things get out of control. It's the old story. Lots of people who are Democrats will say, I want a lot of inclusivity unless they see homeless people near their house. Then they get upset, and then they want the police to come in and clear the homeless people, right? This is human nature.
And I think there's also, they've effectively split the Latino community yet again, because it's already divided for reasons we haven't got time to go into now. But where was I going with that point? Oh, so many thought, oh, they're only going to deport those who are criminals. There's this myth that there's going to be these sweeps, but they're going to leave everyone who's been a good tax-paying citizen. They're just going to pluck out those who are allegedly criminals. They may or may not be. So they've bought into the self-flagellation, if you like, and have bought into the schism. He's not talking about me. And I use the taxi test with issues of racism, right? Can you get a taxi after midnight in your city? And if not, why? And so it doesn't matter how much you've achieved in your life. At the end of the day, you are just another brown face to these Christo-fascist, white supremacist overlords that you have elected to support. It's
Yeah, yeah. Well,
it's going to be crushing for people. And
that's what's
don't you
happening.
love Trump's defense? Oh, I'm not going to separate families. The ones who are legal can go with them. That's his newest solution.
That's the
There's
that's
a
the
logic, there's a perverse logic. I'm not separating them. You see, they've got choices.
Well, I mean, the main point is that what he is talking about doing now needs the actual doing, the actual implementation of the plan. And that is difficult even when you're a really intelligent person with excellent administrative skills. He's neither of those. And he's going to find, just watch what happens, because it is incredibly complicated. Everything in a big system like this, you pull from here, you upset something there. You'll get all kinds of unintended consequences. And so then he's the one now running it. It's
Well,
that
what
simple.
he'll do, if we look at his past form, there'll be enormous camera footage of, let's say, I'm making up the number, but let's say 1,000 people put into a detention center ready to be go. And that footage will be over. Oh, now we had 5 million last week that we got rid of. Oh, it was 10 million. He can just make that up and it will get airplay.
Well, it'll get airplay on Fox, but
So,
you know what'll happen? This is the thing in the modern era, that now people get their news from where they want to get their news. So then you've got, for example, this is one of the reasons why I'm skeptical about all the supposed cheating. I noticed people that I know are sensible, like Brian Tyler Cohen. He's a young guy, but he's
yeah,
really,
yeah,
really solid. David Pacman is another one.
yeah.
These are people that are very progressive. Believe me, if they thought there was anything at all, they're going to tell you zero, right? But people like that are not going to cut him any slack, nor is the people on the Bulwark, the people in the Lincoln Project, even the New York Times, the Washington Post, even, they'll be saying, no, this is really what is happening. Then he has to start saying, well, I'm going to use the justice system to, what, to take down the New York Times? Like, how would this work? I mean, this is the idea of opening multiple fronts.
Oh, I
I'm
don't
going to,
think they even have to bother with the New York Times. Now, I have every faith in the wonderful young podcasters who are coming through, like you named, and Adam Mockler and others. They're fabulous. They will be doing their job. New York Times, maybe not. They couldn't even bring themselves to talk in any positive way about anything the Dems did, and still aren't. They haven't switched.
well,
Now
okay,
the
I mean,
power's gone. They
that this,
haven't started attacking the new one in power. It's corporate media.
okay,
And I
but
think the founders of, sorry, go on.
that's not exactly true. Okay, we get the New York
Well, it's
Times,
on its way.
we get the New York Times, and we read it, and the New York Times, they carried plenty of, including entire, exposés, page after page, saying, "Do not elect Trump. This is a really bad idea," in great detail, tons of articles. Now they didn't make all the articles about against Trump. They tried to be, this is the both sides, and people that are anti-Trump, that are more progressive, more democratic, their preference would be, don't ever say anything good about about Trump. It's not like they said anything good, but they covered both sides, and they would also have people that weren't so keen on Kamala. But there were plenty of articles, plenty, lots and lots of this, but it wasn't enough because not everybody reads the New York Times, for
Oh, it's a
example.
very small readership compared with the size
Right,
of the
right. But
nation.
this is like where
But
you
I
get your
still
news.
think we're going through this with our newspapers too. The bastions. So there's a pattern, right? Let's
Mm.
just clear this up. There's a pattern. Left-wing media dominates everything. I have yet to witness some left-wing media in most places. What they call left-wing, I would call centre, right? So let's be clear about that. But what's been happening here, each city in Australia tended to have a conservative broadsheet and a more centre broadsheet. Okay. Now, what happens if you just report the facts on a case, you get accused of being left wing. So this happens constantly everywhere. And so now our bastions that were centre with some lefty journalists, but if you did a content analysis overall centre, reasonable thinking centre, they are now all doing this both sidism. Oh, now we've got this other person on the board and do, 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 do. And so there's this erosion of that space. It's not that it's bridging anything to anything, it's just eroding the odd safe place where you used to think. So I predict New York Times um, is drifting compared with
I mean,
where it used to be.
time will tell. As
Yeah.
this is starting to now move into 2025, how much, the last example in this country of clear bias assistance to those in charge was in the Iraq War, because Bush and his team managed to convince a lot of journalists that there were weapons of mass destruction. And there were all kinds of journalists who were saying, oh, yes, we have to engage in the war. And only later did people realize, no, that was all mostly made up. But since then, whoever is in charge tends to take a lot of heat. It's just the nature of
But
the.
I can remember as that was unfolding, because Bush was Trump before Trump in the sense now he looks magnificent in the rearview mirror compared with
Mhm.
what we've got now. But at the time, he was a laughing stock, whether he's brain damaged through alcohol or whatever, and he was at the mercy of his Pentagon advisors and others. But I remember there was one Iraqi called Chowdhury who was in Bush's ear leading into some of these fateful decisions. And he was the one who famously said, if you liberate Iraq, take out Saddam, you will be greeted with flowers and chocolates.
Yeah.
And now it's 30 years later, whatever it is. I still remember that phrase going, this is insanity. And that's when the weapons of mass destruction thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's one thing for the Americans to swallow the poisoned lolly, but the UK did it too, and we did it too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the left said at the time, and by left, I mean the left when printed it, it wasn't the left saying it, it was responsible professionals saying, we are not seeing the behind the scenes data for this. So the head of our intelligence organizations were going, we're not actually seeing this,
Mm-hmm.
but bowed to the US, and I will never forgive Tony Blair. He needn't have gone in. Now, what was interesting, the UK was never happy with their role in there. And the nation was divided roughly 50-50 for 8 years over that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even conservatives were furious at that because there was no evidence. If they had it, they would have produced it. There was no evidence.
No, it's true. That's totally true. I mean, this is the other thing is that politics is one bad decision after another. And I mean, I think the bottom line to all this, though, is that what's true is that right now, in all kinds of places in the world, Israel, France, Germany, the war in Russia, Ukraine, Syria just fell, the U.S., well, Spain is another one where it's really razor thin. He had to cut deals to form the government. There is intense division all throughout the Western world.
Mm.
In the democratic
But the
institutions.
optimist in me thinks, okay, like you say, they have to own it. Once you've got the big seat, you have to own it. Now, a lot of these far right coalitions, whether it's Italy or the Netherlands and different places, they're having to negotiate with other parties,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they never have workable policies themselves. They don't, because they're hate and greed, they're not coming up with things for people. So how do you deal with that if you're part of their parties? You have to do one of two things. You either have to ratchet up the xenophobia, the racism, and the politics of hate, or you have to come to the table
Mm-hmm.
and have some serious conversations. Like the woman in Italy, I find her very bizarre because she's the first female head, and the party's called the Brotherhood of Italy.
Mm-hmm.
She's the head of the Brotherhood of Italy. I mean, really? Okay. But she appears to be stepping up to the role, which is something that Trump never did. Some people do that. They enter at this level. I mean, even Kamala, she was hugely competent at what she did, but it was a big step up to run the campaign she did. But she did step up,
Right,
you
but
know.
see, there's that logic how you said earlier, because the defining subject of this period is the immigration moving around. You've got a lot of
Yes.
people. Okay, so then what happens is you start to get too many people. Like I have to tell you, I was not pleased when I would hear there are all these hundreds of thousands of people around New York, and I thought, how did they get there? Like, what kind of crazy system is this that you have all these people coming in? I thought, no, this is too loose, a way to manage the border. It's not a good idea. So then what starts to happen is people will pick the person who they think, oh, this person will stop that. And Trump is a lot more likely to clamp down on that and clamp down hard. Why did Biden wait till the last year of his presidency? First, he lets it all run amok. Then he decides, okay, now we're going to allow this much harder. He should have stepped in there from the beginning. Why did he keep? So he kept the tariffs on China. He kept Trump's tariffs, but he allowed the border implementations Trump had brought in to elapse. That was a big
Yeah,
mistake.
I struggle with this thing that the problem is too many people.
No, it's how you let them
I
in.
think it's,
It's not too many people. It's that you create a feeling of insecurity, and this is why Chinese, Latinos were voting to stop the immigration. That was their thing. Ask yourself
talk
how
about
crazy that
pulling
is.
the ladder up,
Well, yeah, but
totally.
it's human
But here's
nature.
the thing. here's the thing, Andre. In economic terms, if we in Australia, the US, and the UK want to have a lifestyle into our retirement
Hmm.
years and our old age, a quality retirement,
Hmm.
we're not having 8 kids anymore. We're not having 4 kids
Yes,
anymore.
it's true. It's
We
true.
actually need immigration. Now we can have the conversation who gets the tick, but we actually need to shift this fundamental demonization and this idea that there's millions of marauding brown people everywhere, and it's never white. Okay, let's be clear about that. So we need it. Then we can have the conversation. Whereas if it's all billed in Australia, we certainly need it, or our economy would shrink. And we need young migrants and we need healthy migrants. We need skilled migrants. We actually need immigration. And I have not seen one Democrat, one Labor leader in the last 30 years who's actually made that case.
But it's the perception. It's
They,
not the.
they go for the middle because immigration is the easy, lazy vote getter, like we've established. They all have to say, we're going to be just as tough, whether they are or aren't, but oh, we'll be strong too.
But that's the
They
point.
don't make the argument if you want to die in poverty eating cat food, stop
But
immigration.
it's the perception. It's not the thing itself. It's how you manage the message of something. It's not
Exactly.
okay. But
And
that's
they
my
have
point.
all failed.
My point is that that was one of the big problems with the Biden administration. I was bothered by it, and I'm a Democrat. I didn't like what he was doing.
Yeah, but the Ohio thing was really interesting because the community had actually asked for the immigrants to come. Why? Because people aren't prepared to do those terrible jobs for bugger all money, but that's half the conversation. Right? So that was a case in point that could have been elevated more. It got distracted with eating of the dogs and cats, right? Whereas there was actually another more precious message in there. So
Well,
you could have a system of bringing in the numbers and providing cultural support in different, out of the main cities. Immigrants will tend to go to the
okay,
major
all of
cities till they
that
get
all of
established.
that needs political will and implementation. I mean, it's great to talk about what could be, and we all know that Republicans especially manipulate the subject. They're really the cause because most business owners are Republican, backers, and they're the ones that are looking for the cheapest possible labor. So the whole thing is manipulated.
Yes, and no one
Right.
makes that connection
Okay.
either.
Okay. But the point being, though, that when you're in power, what annoys me is first you have to win. Before you can do anything, you have to win the election. It's plain and simple.
Mhm.
So don't do things that will allow the other side to message against you. It's really simple. And Democrats do this every single time. They do it every time.
Oh, they're the worst messages
Then
ever.
they make
Yeah,
themselves vulnerable to that sliver of people that you can scare and say, look, these people
totally.
are coming in. Well, if you had gotten in front of that, and this is my whole argument. I mean, if you're going to keep the tariffs, apparently Trump couldn't do anything right, but apparently Biden kept the tariffs on China, some of them, right? Because he thought it was in his interest. Why wasn't it also in his interest to keep some semblance of that or keep close to that in regard to the border? Instead, he let it get out of control. And that's a really easy place to attack someone and say, look how crazy this is because it's visceral. People that are watching the news, if you tell them, look, there are the caravans. Remember the famous caravans? They're coming in,
Mm.
they're taking over everything. Well, if they're not happening, then they're not happening. Biden wasn't doing anything about this. He just wasn't. He waited until the last year. And then,
Well, that's not actually the case. He did bump up funding for the border security more than in Trump's time. He did actually invest more in it, but I
well,
don't know how
ineffectively then, because
effective
it
that
didn't, it,
was.
it didn't
But
stop
see,
the flow.
here's the catch 22. And I think we're going to see it play out in Texas, right? Texas voted. The economy is like this in Texas and Mexico because
Yes,
of
it's true. Yeah,
geography. The
yeah.
legal and the illegal economies are like this. You cannot extricate that. It's the same with, well, we're going to build the wall. There is not a rancher on that whole 2,000 miles who's going to willingly give up their property for that. Bush tried it, didn't
Yeah.
work.
No, of
Not going to
course.
happen.
Of course.
Not going to happen. So he'll build 20 feet of wall and photograph it over and over and go, look what I've done. But the point is, there will be no wall. He's staggeringly incompetent. So the process will not be improved or streamlined in any way. So we have to keep talking about this because we have to shift the paradigm because, like I said, it's leading not only to friction in the US, it's leading to the far right everywhere. And so until there's a counter discourse, and I'll just take this moment to point out, the majority of the world is not white.
Of course, yeah, all of that is true. All
So
of that is true.
moving right along, we've got to get out of this racialized identity crap
Hmm.
that is holding things up and move to a
Right,
more
but
grown-up
right, but
conversation.
I know,
I'm
but
not
how,
opposed to numbers
Lena,
being
how's that going to
funneled.
happen? Look, that's not going to happen anytime soon when you've got a big party, one of the parties in the US. They're not going to stop doing that. They'll continue doing it. They'll continue
Of
pounding
course,
away.
because it's lazy and easy. Of course.
Okay, right.
There's
So how do you stop it? The one way you stop it is take away their subject. Make sure that they can't attack you on a subject that,
no
their
matter
favorite
what you
subject.
do or say, they'll say it's not enough. And one immigrant murders one person, that's 5 years for them. They can milk that, right? So where we're differing, because I think we're sort of have some common ground, but where we're
Mhm.
differing, you're thinking one technique might be more effective than another technique. I'm not that convinced because I think it's rotten as an idea. And I'll tell you why in relation to climate change and stuff. Not that any country's doing anything about it, right? But the
Yeah.
crisis, but always it comes back to the overpopulation argument, right?
Hmm.
Oh, there's too many people. These are people who care about the issue and want to try and find solutions, even if they're in a radical minority, they're trying to. Overpopulation. No, I refuse to accept that. And the reason I don't accept that is a Colombian family of 14 use less power, water, everything else than an American household of one person. It's not the number of people, it's what they're doing.
It's the
And
message.
it's the same here.
It's the message, Lena. It's the message. This is not about what is true. It's about the message. Okay, so
Well, I think we have to be part of a
okay,
bigger, more grown-up message because
of
you can
course,
just, it's
yes,
a
but
sewer of hatred and cheapness and shallowness and cruelty, and I'm not signing up for that anymore.
well, but how? Okay, how
Ever.
would you not? How would you not sign up for it? You, like I or anyone else, your sign up is that you will vote for the party that you think will represent your interests more fairly, better, right? What else can you do?
Yeah, but I'm an educator by profession too, so I can't ever give up hope that there's nothing wrong with making people think,
Oh well, no,
right?
for sure, for sure. I mean, this all look. I mean, if we want to say, well, what's the summary? Of course, there's no question. Uh, Ending prejudice, becoming more illuminated on any level is super important. There's no question. But I'm also a pragmatist. If I'm in the government, even if I think all the right thoughts, if I think, okay, this would be ideal, I'm gonna look around. It's like sports. What are the referees calling here? What's the game? Because I may think it's ideal that you should get a red card for some, but they're not giving red cards. Okay, well then I have to adapt. I want to win the game. Why? Because it's not just about winning. It's because if your party wins, especially now, you're more protected. I mean, let's face it. This
Yeah,
would
but
be a
there's a lot, true, but there's a lot of work to be done because the American public education system, which I don't think we'd dispute is being starved for two generations, not the best anyway. I mean, Americans, we've all seen those videos where Americans in the street anywhere struggle to name three countries outside of America. They really reach to get to Canada and Mexico. After that, it's a lost cause, right? So it's we're going to see the equivalent in the Muslim world of the madrasas and um, Islamic schools, which are very varied, by the way. I live in a Middle Eastern suburb, and there are many different types of schools. So I'm not doing a blanket thing here. What I'm talking about are the ones that are most prescriptive, most narrow, science denying stuff that is going on, that is going to be accelerated in this regime. After that, you can't have a working democracy if the public education system becomes colouring in for Sunday school. You actually can't breed the next nurses, teachers.
So you're saying, am I hearing you say that in 4 years, this crew, this group of this group of incompetents, they're going to set it up so that in 4 years, all the schools will be teaching white nationalist
Not
Christianity? Is
in the
that
blue states, not in the blue states, right? But it'll become very pronounced,
in the red
the
states?
curriculum in red and blue states,
Yeah.
right?
Well, the problem with that, you see, the problem is with all this is that everything you do now, you implement something in the schools, but the kid goes home and he turns on the internet. I mean, there is no way. This is like whack-a-mole. I mean, on the most in 1940 this would work. No, it doesn't work now. You can do all the preaching you like. You can pray in schools. You
But
can do
then if
anything you
they're
want.
streamed in through their older brothers and cousins to right-wing echo chambers of misogynistic,
Yeah,
disgusting,
yeah, sure.
sadistic, primitive thinking, that's not a good adjunct to a not very good school system that isn't teaching critical
It's
thinking.
true. It's true. But again, this all to do this in a really effective way, you need something like the Third Reich, where for a while they had so much control of the situation, they could flood the zone, and predictably, they destroyed themselves in doing so because it's
Oh,
very
yeah.
difficult to do.
Longer term, I'm not as worried as I am about the next 2 years. Longer term, I think this is what the universe has provided people. The famous, now famous FAFO, it's become a thing. It's become a thing. And they could end up actually swinging in quite a surprising way in a few years.
Swinging
People
in
do
which way?
have free will, even though it's tarnished. You know?
So swinging which way? You mean swinging back the other way?
Yeah, of saying, I didn't realize. I think healthcare is going to be absolutely key to this.
Yeah.
So
Well,
the extent they mess with veterans and healthcare will do it.
yeah. Well,
But
look.
I would put money, I bet over half of veterans voted for Trump.
No, there were a lot. There were a lot of people that voted uh, that were not expected to vote the way they voted, and I think the women's rights issues had less power in that those initiatives did always did well, and the citizens prefer to for that to be free. So the blue states basically are covered, and some of the red states as well. So then and that's by the way, that's another reason. That's another pattern that I'm sure you remember from 2020 when the MAGA people were saying there was cheating, and all you had to say to them was, look, how can there be cheating when people are using the same vote, the same, it's a big sheet of paper. They were voting against Trump, but they were voting for a Republican down ticket. So then
Mm.
this happened in different places. And this election, Ruben Gallego was elected in Arizona, but Arizona went to Trump. Same thing happened in
Mm.
Michigan. So now you're asking me to believe that you can target just that. It's going to be
Mm.
which is it just seems a little bit strange. And when you, by the way, when you do anything like this, what you do when you start to try to do something precise, you'll leave trails. So any statistician, anyone looking at the data will go, this doesn't look right. There's something a little off. But in fact, there was this wave that turned in his direction, in all kinds of places, through Asians, Latinos, African American men. A lot of
Mm.
women didn't vote. But, white women voted for him more this time around, right?
Well, yeah, and I think each of our countries and cultures is suffering from a crisis of masculinity
Well, that, by the way, that's
that
Pluto in
then leaves
astrology.
young men vulnerable to this. So that's for another video.
Yeah, well, that
The
maybe that's a good
crisis.
thing to end on because
I
that
don't
might
want to
be,
just tack it on to this one, but I
yeah,
think
right.
that's
Well,
a
you see,
fascinating conversation.
that's the American Pluto return. That's the dominant theme right now. Whenever you think male domination, male, all of this, Pluton, Trumpy, Kash
Mm,
Patel, all these people. This is Pluto. Well, Pluto is on the return point right now, but Pluto will move forward. And in the end, Pluto is a smaller influence than, say, Uranus, Neptune, which are big planets. That's one of the
mm,
things when you're doing astrology, look to Sun, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. They're the big forces. And
mm.
that Uranus Neptune is what'll likely dictate the next election, for example. By then, Pluto is less of a factor. Pluto is the male, the bros, basically, the Joe Rogans of the world and so on.
Hang on, Dale, 1 second. Sorry, I have to go.
Okay, that was fun. We'll get together soon. And yes,
Totally. We'll do it again next
yes.
month.
All right.
So thank you for having me on,
No,
Andre.
that was great. All right, we'll talk soon.
Cheers.